PowerBoat Television, North America's premier boating show. Here's this week's My Boat feature.
Part of the annual maintenance you should do every year with your stern drive is to change the water pump impeller to make sure nothing happens. The other thing you should do is carry a spare in the boat, so in case something does happen when you're away from your home base or your driveway, you may have something to hand to a marina that can fix it for you, or in the worst case, you can get out of the water onto a trailer and fix it yourself. So this week on My Boat, we're going to show you how to change your water pump impeller here at the Mercruiser Training Center.
With all the tools at hand, let's get started.
Well, there's your first item. You have to remove the trim tab or the anode and replacing the trim tab. Next, what you'd probably do is drain the gear case oil. In our case, we're in a classroom situation here, so it's already dry. So we'll move on to splitting the case.
Using 2 wrenches, the nuts and bolts are removed from both the left and right sides of the drive.
Now there's 2 remaining bolts that are holding the case together, and if you're doing this in the field where there's a risk of this dropping down, you want to start with the hidden bolt up in here that was behind the sacrificial anode and do it first.
The 2 cases split apart quite readily here, but on an in-service drive, you may need a paint scraper to pry the cases apart to expose the water pump housing. To remove the pump housing, first remove the 4 bolts in a cross pattern to avoid warping the housing. Then carefully slide the rubber seal up and off the shaft. Next, slide the pump housing and impeller off the shaft. Finally, pry up and slide the faceplate and gasket up and off, and don't lose track of the impeller key.
Well, once you've got the pump housing out, the first thing you want to do is just remove the water pipe and the coupling here and get the impeller out of the housing and the last gasket off. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is inspect the housing. Make sure it's got no scores, no marks, no wear points and all that indicate it would have to be replaced. The same thing with the plate that goes in the bottom plate. Make sure the same things happen there, and this one you can see is starting to show some signs of wear and it'll have to be replaced. The last item to inspect, but more likely replace, is your impeller. And you want to look for cracks in the vanes, wear across the tips, whether or not it's got burning and stuff on the top and bottom if it's been running dry, and how flexible it is, and whether the inner hub and the rubber are still attached. And if anything looks suspicious, it's time to replace it. Now there's a couple of different ways you can replace it. You can buy individual parts if you're just doing an impeller, or in the case of this, you can buy an entire kit and replace all of the parts, which is what we're going to do. Well, we're ready to start assembling the pump and everything back together again. First thing you want to do is make sure that the mating surface is perfectly clean, and sometimes you might have to use a paint scraper to get off any leftover gasket or perfect seal. So we're going to start and take you through what's rather a detailed process, because this has to be quite accurate to get it right.
The first step is to install the new combination faceplate and gasket after applying Perfect Seal to the bottom face. Next, apply Perfect Seal to the keyway to hold the impeller key in place. Lube the pump housing with Mercury 2,4C, then slide the impeller down the shaft over the key. With the pump housing lubed, simply press down on it while turning the shaft clockwise. After gently installing the housing's 4 bolts, following a cross pattern, the housing is aligned by centering it on the shaft. Finally, torque the bolts to 60 inch-pounds. After applying 2,4C to the shaft seal, slide it down to the housing, and using the supplied tool, pull up on the shaft and press the seal in place. Finally, apply lube to the water tube coupling and install it with the drain slot facing the shaft and insert the water tube. After inspecting the drive shaft casing for any problems, either the drive shaft casing is positioned over the gear casing or the gear casing is lifted up to mate the casings, carefully aligning it so the shaft slides into the spline and the water tube into the hose. A trick here is to rotate the drive shaft to align the splines. The last task is to install the fasteners in reverse order and torque them to 35 foot-pounds.
Well, that's it. It's all done. Project really isn't as hard as you think it is. It's something you can do yourself. and at least have it done by your dealer once a year so you won't worry about any overheat problems. And remember to carry the spare parts in your boat if you boat or fish in remote areas, so you have the kit ready for a dealer, or you can do it yourself when you have the boat on the trailer.